One of the world's worst genocides is playing out in Myanmar right now. An estimated 25,000 people are being killed by the military. A recent UN report says the government are, quote, killing indiscriminately, gang raping women, assaulting children and burning entire villages. The military has denied everything, most things actually, saying the people burn their own villages. Almost 1 million have fled across the border to Bangladesh, a poverty-stricken area that can't cope, and yet South Africa has abstained from a UN vote condemning Myanmar's human rights violations against the Rohingya. Does this make us complicit? And the woman who's allowed the massacres to happen, leader of Myanmar and Nobel Peace Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi. No wonder Amnesty International has stripped her of the Ambassador of Conscience Award. Well, joining us on Skype tonight is Morshed from BRAC, one of the biggest NGOs helping the Rohingya in Bangladesh. In the studio of Shanila Mohammed, Executive Director of Amnesty International South Africa. Very warm welcome. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on this topic. Why was the award taken back?
Well, Jane, exactly for the reasons that you've just outlined. I think, in 2009, as we all know, and that Aung San Suu Kyi has been a hero to many people. She stood up against oppression, repression, and I think in 2009, Amnesty, she was first our prisoner of conscience when she was under arrest, and in 2009 we decided to give her the Ambassador of Conscience Award, which she couldn't accept at the time because she was still a prisoner, under house arrest, and it was only in 2012 when she came out that the award was presented to her by Bono, who is also one of our Ambassador of Conscience. And, it's been a really, really difficult decision for us to take, but, what we feel is that she has not in fact, she's lost her conscience along the way. She has not stepped up. She has not stood up for what the Ambassador of Conscience actually, the award actually is about. It's about being the hope, being a beacon of light, being an ambassador and being the conscience of the world to some extent, and not standing back and allowing human rights violations to take place under your own, in your own space and globally as well. And we feel that, she, unfortunately, we could not associate ourselves with her anymore. So on the 11th of November, our Secretary General, Kumi Naidoo, who is a South African as well, took the decision to strip her of the award.
Well, congratulations, because everyone's been holding their hands up and saying how awful it is, but doing very little. Let's go over to Morshed in Bangladesh, and obviously the country there is feeling the impact of this horrific event, this genocide. So many Rohingyas have fled over to Bangladesh. Tell us, before you talk through the conditions there, what people have suffered getting to you and what they've suffered in their lives.
I think one thing that we must remember, that this is not the first time Rohingyas fled to Bangladesh.
No.
They fled in 78, they fled in 1978, then 1991, then 2012, 2016, and this is 2017, the latest kind of exodus from Myanmar. Unfortunately, we have seen the exodus become more and more violent as the time passes by. So, yeah, the first few days when we were there receiving the refugees, some actually traveled 13 days, 14 days straight without having proper food and medication, because they were injured, they were wounds, and they were suffering. So they came, and they came literally without having anything with them. Maybe they were wearing the same clothes for a fortnight before they arrived in Dhaka, in Cox's Bazar. So, yeah, this was a horrific situation there in Cox's Bazar. And most of all, they really had, for example, let me give you an anecdote. In the first few days, after a week, probably I spot a Rohingya mother sitting beside the road, and I could see that she is holding a child in her lap, and there is a child beside her. So I approached her, only to find out the child in her lap has died. I don't know when, but she had no clue. And she was completely unaware of the fact that the child she is caring for is dead. So this was the situation when they fled. It was beyond described. You cannot describe it in words.
And I guess that's an example of the sort of mental trauma that they must have endured, not knowing that your child has died. I mean, I know there are horrific stories of them bayoneting children, burning them. I mean, seeing them there in Bangladesh, and the country's been amazing taking in so many. But, I mean, it makes you wonder how this sort of atrocity could reach this level.
Yeah, and this is not, as I said, this is not the first time.
No.
And, of course, we have around 1 million Rohingya, more than 1 million Rohingya in Bangladesh soil. Not everybody suffered the same. Some fled because of the fear, because of the story spreading. Some really suffered horribly. It's really horrible if you hear their stories. Almost you wonder whether who did this to them. It's beyond human imagination, if you may.
Shidala, I mean, what do we know about? I mean, Aung San Suu Kyi. I know that her hands are tied by the military, right? So there's probably very little she can do. But you hear some of her comments, and she's not averse to really what's going on. Why do you think the international community has been so hands-off to what's been happening? I mean, it's a very wealthy country, it's mineral riches, I mean, the geopolitical interests. But how can you not respond to that sort of level of suffering?
You know what I think, Jane? I think what's happened in the world is that we've become selective in whose lives matter, and
fatigue.
I think, and there's a certain level of fatigue. But I also feel that I mean, for example, Amnesty has been on the ground for 2 years, documenting cases of atrocities and human rights violations. And things like my colleague has mentioned here, we've documented. I mean, we've got cases where our researchers have witnessed extrajudicial slayings, executions. We know, in fact, we submitted a report to the UN, which was very clear. We gave them the names of 13 military generals that we believe with evidence that need to be brought up and need to be tried on crimes against humanity. With Aung San Suu Kyi, I mean, I think that, yes, she can't control the military, but since she has come in the civilian government in April 2016, there was a lot that she could have done.
Yeah, that was a moment.
Yes, there were laws that could have been changed. She's in the majority in parliament. And I think for us, one of the worst pains, I would say, because, she was once a human rights activist, is that her and her civilian government have been deliberately preventing UN investigators from going onto the ground to gather evidence. I mean, as you know, in September, the Human Rights Council in Geneva was very brave and passed a resolution calling for the gathering of evidence. And, as Amnesty, we've been pushing that the next step has to be that this evidence has to go to the International Criminal Court. But Aung San Suu Kyi and her people have been blocking the gathering of evidence.
Now, I'm going to ask you something, sorry, very quickly. And Lee, I mean, we're going to come to you from Bloemfontein. I want to hear your question. But when South Africa abstains from a vote condemning this sort of action, why would they do that?
South Africa, to be totally honest with you, Jane, is it's just mind-blowing. The schizophrenic approach they take at the UN, particularly around human rights issues. I mean, you have seen South Africa. Yes, you have seen South Africa, who, by the way, during the apartheid era, there was the UN. There were people who stood up in solidarity and pushed through resolutions in order to support the anti-apartheid movement. But here we have South Africa that is refusing to even condemn atrocities, and it's not the first time, Jane. They have, when you look at the Global Compact against refugees and migrants, again, they abstained. In fact, they put in objections. When you look at LGBTI rights, I mean, South Africa has got the best constitution and legal framework on LGBTI rights, and yet, when they get to the UN, they do, they go totally against their own constitution.
Okay, Liu, go ahead.
Hi, Jane, how are you?
Good, thank you. What's your question?
I'm good, thank you. I think it's actually very embarrassing that South Africa abstained from this matter. I mean, the Muslim community, they were the one who stood with us during apartheid. And I think everyone was very optimistic when Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi came to power. We were very positive. We were looking forward to a new change in Myanmar. And I think it's very embarrassing what happened. I mean, we understand the political situation in that country. We understand that she's sharing power with the military. But even her voice alone could have done so much to instill confidence around the world that, you know what, I support these people, I understand what they are going through, and I'm willing to bring change and support to them. And I do hope that opposition parties in our country will take this matter to Parliament and ask the President, and particularly the Minister Lindwe Sisulu, why exactly did South Africa abstain?
Yeah.
Why exactly South Africa
and you know what, Lou, we're going to leave it there because we run out of time, but we're not going to take our eye off this, and we must ask about South Africa's actions. Shanela Mohammed, thank you very much for talking to us. And Moshe, thank you very much for talking to us about your work there and what the Rohingyas experience. That's our show for tonight. News is next.